Welcome back to the weekly edition of Illinois Lawmakers. I'm Jack Titchener along with Peter Hancock of Capital News Illinois, our partner in the Illinois Lawmakers production. Good to have you back, sir.
Thanks, Jack.
Let's see, lots of things happening now at the Statehouse. One of the efforts, of course, at this time of the year is what's going on with the budget, what's going on behind the scenes from what you're hearing. The revenue picture has shifted several times over the course of the last 6 months or so, from a very large projected budget to a surplus, back now to what the Governor's Office of Management and Budget is saying we're off by about $500 million.
Yeah, there have been competing estimates of what the revenue picture is going to look like next year. Part of that is because there are two different groups in Illinois whose job it is to look at the revenue. There's the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, GOMBI as we call it, and there's the Legislative Commission on Government
Forecasting and Account. I always get that wrong.
COGFA, as we call it. So the governor has a budget office, the legislature has a budget office. They sometimes are not in agreement. This week, the governor's office lowered their revenue estimates, bringing them more in line with what the legislature's office had been estimating. So the bottom line is we are looking at a very tight budget year, and that's putting a lot of pressure on lawmakers to do some things they haven't had to do before. We've got some younger or less experienced lawmakers here who have never gone through lean budget times like we're going through now, and they've never had to say no before. And so that's, I think, causing a lot of consternation within the Democratic caucus as well as just generally in the General Assembly.
What kind of headaches does that give them in trying to actually sit down and run the numbers on the line items? Speaker Welch is going to appear later on the program. He told me earlier this morning that everybody's going through every line item to see where there can be efficiencies and possibly.
Yeah, it's a process that is not pleasant. It's also not very exciting and sometimes not very interesting because you have to get down into the nitty-gritty details of state government spending, but it's something that has to be done. We're looking at programs. One of the more high-profile ones is the health care for immigrant adults. It's a Medicaid-like health care program for people who would qualify for Medicaid but for their immigration status. That's been very controversial since it began. The governor is now proposing to eliminate that. There are other things in the budget too. People would like to spend more money, but it's just not there this year.
It's certainly not as bad as 2008 when everything crashed. I remember talking to one of the senior appropriations people, and he was showing how the estimates had dived almost a quarter within a couple of days, but still in the current mentality or the current atmosphere here, a lot of people just never had to deal with this kind of thing before.
Yeah, and it's true. They haven't had to deal with this before, but it is part of the natural cycle of state government anywhere. You have good times and lean times and sometimes down times. What makes it hard or less hard is how well positioned your state is to deal with those times when revenues either flatten out or start dropping off.
We've got about a minute left. I want to ask also about some dramatic news this week that Speaker Welch has basically removed State Representative Fred Crespo of Hoffman Estates from his leadership role and from the caucus.
Yeah, he was chairman of one of the appropriations committees. He's been removed. He has always been more of a fiscally conservative Democrat. What we're hearing was that he was not being a team player, was perhaps trying to write his own budget outside of the leadership team, and so he's been removed from his position.
And we will hear more from Speaker Welch on that up next on this edition of Illinois Lawmakers. Peter Hancock, as always, thank you for your insights to the goings-on here under the dome.
Good to be here.
Leading off this edition of Illinois Lawmakers, a newsmaker interview with Democratic House Speaker Emanuel Welch of Hillside. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, Jack, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Good to have you here. Let's start with the broad brushstrokes. What were your priorities coming into the spring session, and how are they playing out now as we head into the final couple of weeks of the scheduled session of the General Assembly?
Yeah, I think top priority, as always, has been the budget. You know, going into this year, we knew the budget was going to be more difficult than in years past. I came in 2021 at the height of COVID, at the height of COVID dollars being used in budgets. And now we're getting back to where we were before COVID. And so we knew that a year ago. And so going into this year, we wanted to put some processes in place that really focused on making sure, once again, we deliver a responsible, compassionate budget that we can go home and be proud of.
What is the advice you've given to rank and file members about their priorities in terms of how it's going to match up with the amount of revenue that we're actually going to have on hand, that we know at this point that we're going to have on hand, or we believe at any rate?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've said to the caucus pretty consistently since day one is that no one's going to get everything they want, that we have to have reasonable expectations, that we have to balance the budget. We're going to spend what we bring in and no more. We're going to continue to receive credit upgrades and not downgrades. I'm proud of the fact that we've passed balanced budgets. I'm proud of the fact that we've had 9 credit upgrades. I think that's one thing that Democrats don't get enough credit for, is the fiscal responsibility that we've shown under my leadership, under Senate President Don Harmon's leadership, and the governor. And we're going to continue to do that.
And let's talk about the revenue projections. That's been kind of a moving target here at the Capitol ever since back before the fall veto session, when it looked like the deficit could be in the billions of dollars. The latest numbers this week from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget show we're probably off by $500 million of what we expected to go into next year's spending plan. How is that going to impact the negotiations that the budgeteers are doing right now as they go through human services, education, K through 12, higher ed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real difference. And so it's going to have an impact on negotiations. And I can tell you, both the House and the Senate, we're going line by line through that budget. We're trying to find efficiencies because every single member of both chambers understands the charge. The charge is to pass a balanced budget.
Are these going to be real cuts, or are these just going to be reductions in what were going to be increases that went into some of these line item areas?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the process because the members are genuinely going through a compassion exercise. They have to go through these silos, and they have to go line by line and decide what's a priority, what are things that reflect our morals and our values. And those are the things that we're going to decide as a collective, but we're going to do it with less money than we've done in the past.
There were some issues last year trying to get a budget passed. It took 3 tries to get the omnibus bill finally over the 60 vote level. This week there are reports out that one of the folks who was involved in I guess you could call it maybe a mini revolt, Representative Fred Crespo. He's out of the House Democratic Caucus now. Can you tell us why that happened, sir?
Well, let me say this. One of the things I've been focused on since last May is what can I do differently as a leader? And the things that the members brought to me last May as concerns, ways to improve the process, we've addressed those issues. We've certainly tried to address those issues. I think we can always do better. And going into this year, we implemented a whole lot of new changes. New chief of staff, new deputy chief of staff, 4 budgeteers instead of 1 budgeteer. Lots of input being received by the entire caucus, from surveys to meetings with the sub-caucuses, the chief of staff meeting with the sub-caucus, the chief budgeteer, Majority Leader, Leader Gable, meeting with the sub-caucus, myself meeting with all of the sub-caucuses and individual members. There's a lot of things being done to receive input from the entire caucus so that we put together a budget that reflects the collective. And Representative Crespo for whatever reason, chose not to be a part of those processes and to go on his own, to go alone. And to me, this is a team effort. It's about the House. And we're going to continue to move forward as a collective. The Great 78 is only as powerful as working together. I tell them all the time, diversity is our strength, but our power comes from our unity. And there's no I in team.
Was the breaking point the idea that he reportedly was trying to come up with his own alternative budget?
No, not at all. Anyone can file a bill. Anyone can file a bill. The breaking point was, as an appointed chair of one of my appropriations committees, not communicating with the chief of staff, not communicating with the lead budgeteer, Leader Gable, not communicating with me as the speaker. There are processes that we put in place. One of the things that I have focused on this year as a theme with the caucus is atomic habits. We're only good as the systems that we have in place, and we have to work together. If we don't like those systems, make those systems better. But if we're going to deliver things for the collective that's good for the state of Illinois, we have to follow processes. And the chairman chose not to have any conversations with anyone, despite those processes calling for that. And so I had to make a tough decision. And I do believe it's what's best for the caucus.
Let's move on to actually passing the budget. As far as we know, these are the last figures you have from the governor's office, the last figures you have from COGFA. It's kind of like the last snapshot of the state's future revenues as we know them going into the new fiscal year. Will this be the budget that's passed before May 31st? Will this be the last word on it? Or will some of the impacts from what Washington may do have you come back to Springfield and maybe have to take a new look at things?
Well, it's certainly hard to say that this could be the last action that we take with the erratic leadership that we're seeing in Washington. The chaos that's been created in this president's first 100 days has been unprecedented in our country. And we're already seeing it impact other states in their economy, and the state of Maryland just saw a credit downgrade, not because of something they're doing, but because of stuff that's going on out of Washington. And so we don't know what we don't know, Jack. And you know, this president can send out a tweet that changes the world, and we may have to come back. And so we've been preparing the caucus that that's a possibility. Know that something could happen based on the federal budget that brings us back.
I have to ask about another one of the big issues that's kind of weighing down everything or overhanging everything, and that's mass transit reform. You're on record as saying no blank checks to the transit agencies unless there are rider-based reforms. What kind of reforms do you want to see come out of the negotiations that continue here at the Capitol?
Well, one of the things that we've been looking at for well over a year now, because we have a working group that includes a diverse group of folks from the city, the suburbs, that have really taken a deep dive into this issue and have all become experts on it. And one of the things they've said is we have to have reforms before we even talk about revenue. We have to improve the ridership experience. We have to improve rider safety. We have to improve safety for the employees on these trains and on these buses. We have to do things differently before we even talk about giving out any more money. What's been asked is give us money to do the same thing, and that's just not smart.
And as far as we're hearing, they're getting close to some kind of a consensus on how to reorganize the oversight of the various transit agencies. Is there a particular format or architecture that you would like to see?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the negotiations. And yes, the negotiations, all reports are going well, that they're getting close on agreements with regard to those reforms that we're insisting on. There's been a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations, a lot of stakeholders at the table. It's going the way it's supposed to. And I'm hoping that we would have something soon.
And will there be a revenue stream to replace that $750 million?
Well, we don't know. Let's see if they can come to agreement on reforms and what those reforms would take to get done.
We will stay tuned, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much. Our guest on this edition of Illinois Lawmakers, House Speaker Emanuel Welch.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Illinois Lawmakers continues with another newsmaker interview, this time with House Republican leader Tony McCombie of Savanna. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's kind of bring folks up to date on big issues like the budgets and things. But as far as this session is going, when you went into it, what were your expectations? And now, 2 weeks ahead of adjournment, where do things lay in your mind?
Yeah, well, as you're aware, this is starting to get to be the really busy time. We've had some changes within the management of the Democrat caucus, so even the floor has been a little bit different. We're starting on time and some process things, so that was certainly unexpected, but it kind of lets us know a little bit more of what's coming. As the minority party, we're often left in the dark. So we were anticipating with the budget estimates from before with the revenue and how they continuously change, go up, go down. We were anticipating that this year would be a push from the Democrat caucus to have a tax increase. And we've been talking about that as our caucus. Our thoughts are to, if anything else, have a flat budget, have no tax increases, and we're going to have to amend some policies that have been passed, especially concerning energy. Because there's unintended consequences for a lot of things that we do here, and now we see ourselves in a place where there's going to be tax increases. There has to be changes in the transportation, energy crisis that is going on. So we have a lot of things that are happening right now.
You talk about the energy crisis, and does that have to do with the actual amount of electricity that's available to consumers here in the state of Illinois through the grids that we're all associated with?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. As we learn more through the auction that just went through with MISO and as well as PJM, a big piece of that is capacity, and that's where the increase in the consumers will have. So the combination of policies that, like we've said, we've passed. Luckily in Illinois, we have nuclear, so there is initiatives to hopefully push that through. We have the Clinton station that has one reactor that is in MISO. If we could fire that other reactor, build that other reactor up, that would be a real improvement. But it's really about the capacity, and these maps are pretty big. It's not just when you think of a MISO or PJM, it's not just Illinois. And a combination of that with the shutting down coal and natural gas and not expanding nuclear is certainly a problem. So it's really about capacity.
One of your House Republican colleagues, Ryan Spain, was here talking about that very thing this last week, and his thinking was the state has got to widen its energy portfolio, bring back the natural gas plants, bring back some of the coal-fired capacity if that's possible. And the thing that the state really wants to avoid, and what you're talking about, is not being in a situation like Texas was a few years ago when they had a horrendous ice storm and people literally died because they couldn't get electrical power.
Oh, it's definitely a public safety issue. And as technology grows, the need for energy, grows as well. And it's just like we can't grow here in Illinois with big manufacturing settings because the cost of property taxes as well as the cost of energy. So these are two areas I think that we definitely need to do better.
The Democrats are also talking about an omnibus energy bill that they're looking at with a lot of different pieces. Will there be any Republican input into that if this starts to gain traction here in the last couple of weeks of the session?
There has been no consideration to the Republican caucus, which really is a shame. Although we are in the minority, with 40 members, we represent parts of 102 counties. And we have a large group that has the MISO district, and so that's certainly an issue. But not even so, even where we have up north with me, we have the nuke fleets, and we have PJM. It is still going to be an increase this year, and it's about capacity.
And you're in the Commonwealth Edison area?
I have a mix.
You have a mix?
I have a mix.
Yeah, and same with Ameren, and you've got the other
gerrymandered
co-ops
maps for energy.
and co-ops and everything else. And I want to turn to the budget for a minute, because that's the thing that we always want to see how things are going in that respect. And you mentioned at the outset of your remarks, we've been looking at different revenue estimates all the way going back before veto session that looked like there would be a huge deficit then. Then we get to the governor's budget message in February, and it looks like, well, the revenues will match spending, at least as that package went together. And now the governor's office of management and budget is saying this week that it looks like we'll have about $500 million less than it was going to take to put that budget together. Is anything I said inaccurate? Am I close to that? Or?
No, nothing at all. Even with the $500 million drop, it's still looking at close to $1.9 billion. That is going to be our deficit. And we also, the definition of balance is interesting, and coming from municipal government, but we cannot predict or budget on futures. We have to spend on what we have now, not what we think we're going to get in after the fact. And that's a big problem with the state of Illinois. Our budget has grown. When I first started in 2017, I think the GRF was $36 billion, and here we are today, an estimate that we're going to be passing at $55 billion. And that's a lot of money for taxpayers.
So if we're looking at right now, going into the last couple of weeks of being around, some estimates say, from $500 million to $1 billion off, what do the budgeteers do behind the scenes to try to make everything fit back, the spending and the revenue package come together within those contours?
Yeah, this has been an issue since I've been leader. This is the start of my third year, that we are not really included in those discussions. And oftentimes, the Democrats, from my understanding, are having some working group meetings. They consider the appropriation meetings or committee hearings as part of the budgeting process, which is not truly accurate. But behind the scenes, I think with some of the budgeteers on the majority side, that there is a wish to use some of our expertise, but it's not really digging into numbers, and it's certainly not bringing us into a conversation about what our priorities are.
And last year, of course, things got very strange in the last hours of the session, where you had a group of moderate Democrats who were not for any of the revenue increases that the governor wanted to put in that package. It took 3 votes to get that thing through, and now this week there are numerous reports that one of the appropriations chairs has been removed from that position. Fred Crespo from Hoffman Estates has been removed from that, and the Democratic caucus. How are you reading that, looking across the other side of the aisle?
Well, you're correct. Last year was very interesting. It took 3 times for the vote, and it took them to break their own rules that they drafted to make that happen. And this is an interesting, way to go about it. With Crespo, with Representative Crespo, I worked with him on the Audit Commission as well as subbing in on several appropriations, and really is going to be a loss for the state of Illinois that he is no longer in those positions. Very fair-minded. I don't know, obviously, all the particulars of the whys, but it is going to be a loss for the state of Illinois, that's for sure. But as we go forward, I think you're going to see, and Speaker Welch said it himself, we have a group of tax and spend Democrats, and that's going to be hard to manage for him.
As we go into this last couple of weeks, what do you expect the back and forth to be as those numbers come together?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be back and forth between us as a minority party. Our hope is that the budget continues to really be crafted in the Senate, because then we actually see the budget a couple days before we're going to be passing it. Obviously, there's always amendments to that, but at least we can see the real framework. So that's my hope. And I think on the Senate side, they get along a little bit better to want to work along together.
And as Speaker Welch has said in recent days, that whatever passes at the end of the month may not be the final decision on what the budget actually looks like, because we have no idea how the Trump tariffs might impact state spending in terms, or state revenues in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, we might have more money than they're anticipating. Already our steel industry is doing really well in Illinois. But there is certainly some concern with federal decisions But that's going to be a reaction of us here, whether it's the healthcare and funding for illegal immigration, for climate, and environment issues, for transportation. There is certainly some priorities of the federal government that could affect us, but that means we're going to have to change our decisions.
We've got a little less than a minute left. I was wondering, what are you hearing in terms of mass transit reform and trying to get a bill passed that will deal with all of the issues in Chicago and surrounding counties?
Yeah, and that's interesting because that line item was left out of the governor's budget address in February. So now we're looking at $770 million, and it's going to only be passed through a tax increase.
And in a situation like that, who's going to pay? Is it going to be something on a regional basis, or does that come downstate as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, another place that we're not sitting there, which is unfortunate because we have a lot of people with a lot of knowledge in transportation. But I do believe it's going to be a combination. We've seen a lot of different proposals, whether it's the RTA district, downstate. So we'll have to wait and see what they finally come up with.
House Republican Leader Tony McCombie of Savanna, former mayor of Savanna, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Jack Titchener back with Peter Hancock of Capital News, Illinois. We've talked with Speaker Welch about his thoughts on trying to roll out a new budget under some fiscal constraints this year. We've heard the same information from the House Republican leader, Tony McCombie. As we look forward, Peter, to the next couple of weeks, what do we expect back and forth as far as any public word on how that budget might roll out in the last hours of the session?
As typically happens, it goes down to about the last day, right up to about May 31st, when they finally reach an agreement. Last year, it was both a spending package and a revenue package. It took 3 votes in the House of Representatives to get that revenue package through because it was a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. I would not be surprised if you have to take several votes again this year to get the final package through.
I was curious about that. We talked earlier in this program about the situation with Representative Crespo. Do you think that the same number of moderate Democrats may have some different thoughts about that in the waning hours of the session?
It's entirely possible. A lot of it's going to depend on how much hand-holding and how many deals are made behind the scenes before the bill comes to the floor of this chamber. They may get those ironed out beforehand, or it may get ironed out on the floor, which is often kind of a messy process to watch.
It's what everyone here calls making the sausage.
That's right.
It's a messy situation sometimes. Peter Hancock of Capital News, Illinois, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I'm Jack Titchener. That is it for this edition of Illinois Lawmakers. Thanks for joining us. So long from Springfield.